All right, let's start the November 12th meeting of the Revolving Fund Ad Hoc Committee. We don't have minutes to look at, so we don't have to do that. Okay. Does anybody want to continue the discussion that I started last week?
I do.
Okay.
Can you remind us of what that?
So we were talking
Discussion
about
was-
number 2, the
Expenses
should the
directly related to the. Oops,
No,
sorry,
I'm
that's
talking
concept.
about-
Yep, right.
so should the selectmen set a target amount needed in the rec revolving fund? If so, how? We talked last week about, you came in with your shock number of $3,000. And the impression that I got is you did that because you want to try to set that money aside for safekeeping. Correct me if I'm wrong. Like you want to put it. You talked about putting.
Safer keeping.
You talked about putting it in a capital reserve fund as an example of what we could do with it to keep for safer keeping, so that what I interpreted was that you want to keep that money for the rec department solely. You don't want it to be reappropriated into the general fund or used for other means. Correct? Am I understanding your logic behind that?
Something like that.
Okay.
That could perhaps happen. I think it's safer in a capital reserve fund that is slated for very specific purposes.
Because I'm inclined to feel that this money, it's been raised through fee, so correct me if I'm wrong in this, from fee-based programming. And Jenna had mentioned that a majority of that money came from grant from the state at the time at which...
A chunk of it. I couldn't tell you majority or not, but
Okay,
a large.
a large chunk.
Yeah.
Okay. From the state when they were doing a grant to subsidize scholarships for the camp. So to me, that's money given to the state for rec programming. So to me, the idea of using it for something else seems a bit off topic. So I think that whatever we do, I would push for this money is the rec's. I don't want to call it that. It's not the rec department's money, but it's used for recreation purposes, if that makes sense. So I agree with you where it needs to be safeguarded for that. But does it need to be safeguarded? Is there a movement in town to remove that money from the rec revolving fund and put it into the general fund? I don't know if you can speak to that.
No, I've heard nothing of that.
I haven't heard anything of that.
Then if it's, I mean, we never really know until it happens, until someone decides they want to do it. But I guess that's my feeling of this money. Where should it set a target amount in the RFF, the RRF, excuse me. My inclination is no. There should be no limit. There should be no high, no low limit. The money is there for when it's needed, and that's what it's for. So,
Well, let me ask you. The capital reserve fund, if written correctly, was set up to be used for recreational purposes, whatever that phrase is we want to use there, but
yeah,
basically taking the money that's there to be used for recreational purposes is available to be used for recreational purposes. In the sense that there's in excess of 100 grand there now, can you picture at any point in time a program that would require 100 grand to be used in 1 year?
no, gotcha. Well, at least,
And that's my point. That was my
unless
point.
you come up with a new sport that I'm not unaware of.
And that was my point.
Right.
Was that I don't know that 3,000 is good.
Right. So
But-
I guess my counter question to that would be, is if we're going to move it into another account to sit and wait, do we need to move it? Like, is that creating work just to create work? Like,
Well,
if it's gonna,
Here's
if
the
it's
deal.
gonna serve
Yep.
the same purpose.
here's the deal as I see it.
Yeah.
The way we typically do things in town, if you're gonna make a major purchase, we do it through the capital reserve fund anyway.
True.
Okay? So if the money is already there and the need comes up for creating a field,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean that literally, creating a field,
Yeah.
then it's already, the ball is already rolling, it's there,
Yeah.
it's sitting there, we just need a town meeting
Yeah.
to authorize expenditure of funds.
Did you happen to get any research on capital reserve funds?
I did not.
Okay.
I didn't know where to look.
My experience with capital reserve funds, and correct me if this is incorrect, but generally they're set up for a specific thing: fire trucks, new buildings, police cars. I don't know if they can be set up as generality. We're setting it aside for rec programming or, like,
I'm-
I guess that would be my question.
Let's put it this way, I don't think we're there yet.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, I termed it Marston property, okay? Recreational facilities at Marston property was the way I termed it at the beginning.
I guess that would be more specific.
It tends to put it in that specific range where that's where those funds would be utilized.
Yeah.
And I don't truly want to say this in this particular manner, but that would protect some of these funds from being used at the school, for instance. School has its own things it needs to deal with, and it shouldn't be paid for by town funds, as I see it, or rec funds. Again, that's just me. I'm not the expert on this, but
Right.
that's my feeling on that.
Can I offer one thing on capital reserve funds? Capital reserve funds are created by town meeting. You can get the town meeting can get the money wherever it can. It can say we want to raise it in taxes. It can say we want to pull it out of the fund balance, pull it out of the bank and stick it in a capital reserve fund. It can pull it out of another fund. It can open and close funds however it wishes. It can define them however it wishes. It can say only town meeting can spend those funds, or it can designate spending authority for a fund that it creates. It can say, this is, we raise and appropriate $100,000 for conservation purposes, and the Conservation Commission has the authority to spend it. The town meeting can lay all that out in its warrant article. It kind of defaults to being, we set it up, we spend it as the town. Town meeting is the only way the town gets together and does that. So what town meeting does with fire trucks is it says, all right, this year we're going to put a little money aside and put it in this thing we call the Fire Vehicle Capital Reserve Fund. If next year they say, you know what, we don't need a new fire truck, we need a police car, we can say, we're taking the money out of that fire vehicle trust fund, a reserve fund, and
shifting it to the-
we're doing something else with it. It's all in the control of the town meeting. It's town's money. They can do with it through the meeting any way it wants. So when it sets it up, what the town did with the revolving fund is they said, town, create this fund, selectmen, you have the authority to spend it. So you don't have to go back to town meeting to spend
Right,
revolving
right.
money, because that's how it was set up.
So
So that,
I guess just so I understand this, hypothetically, if the town created a capital reserve fund for recreational facilities at the Marston property, all the money, $100,000 comes out of the revolving fund for that. Hypothetically, could the year after, could the town vote to say, we want to take the money from that capital reserve fund and put it into capital reserve fund for a new gymnasium at the school?
yes.
So I
Yeah.
guess,
But that would be the wish of the people rather than the spending.
I guess the way I see a capital reserve fund, and again, someone correct me if I'm wrong, frequently happens. The way the money is right now, the select board can spend the money. And if it's in a capital reserve fund, then the way our town, Nottingham, has traditionally written them is that we create it and fund it and then use it down the road, and the authority or the authorization to use it down the road is done at the town meeting. Now, the way I understand the RecRevolving is that at town meeting, 6 people left at the meeting could vote to suspend and take away the RecRevolving and put that money back into the general fund. And because it's done at town meeting, even if there's only a few people there, all that money would be just gone. And by putting it in capital reserve, we have protected it, and it's, it makes it, not harder to spend, but more targeted, more focused, there's more thought and more conversation around, kind of how that happens.
Yeah, and
That
don't
would have to be
misunderstand me,
done
I'm
through
not
a warrant
necessarily.
article.
And it has to be done through a warrant article, right?
You couldn't at the last minute raise your hand and say, I move that we spend this money without having prior notification of it by way of a warrant article. So, just to clarify, it's,
The warrant article would be required to dissolve the RecRevolving fund.
to change anything about it will require a warrant article
Okay.
and a vote,
So you need a warrant article to change a capital reserve fund.
yes.
I thought it could be done by, by petition at the meeting.
No, a petition warrant article has to be on the warrant and noticed in advance like the
Okay.
rest of the stuff,
Oh,
so.
that makes
So really, the
sense.
only change it would do would be changing who has the power to spend that money. Either the entire town population that comes to vote, or the 5 members of the select board, or 3. So, I mean, and don't misunderstand me, I'm not necessarily against a capital reserve fund, I just want to flush out that conversation so that we.
And the select board changes every few years, the members
Right.
change, so, what we, if we say, oh, well, we don't, that's not necessary today, and, we get 40 years down the road and we have new select board members who have a different view on things, things can change, so. And, one other question, I don't know if you have the answer, and actually, Bill, you might have the answer to this too.
Whether we should have a target.
Are the
I figured that.
Are the funds in a capital reserve, does that have the ability to be invested, and it actually grows more than the money would if it's sitting in the RecRevolving?
In a something other than a zero interest environment that we're operating in, it would, the trustees of the trust funds could invest it differently than they otherwise
Okay.
would, but that's up to them.
Okay. So it has the potential to grow.
So okay.
Would it behoove the town to have a capital reserve fund already created? To be utilized for some major expenditure? There's pluses and minuses to capital reserve fund. Some people don't like them at all. And that's mostly because there's money sitting there really not doing much, and you're still paying taxes on it. It's just a small amount or lesser amount than the whole expenditure. But it takes a while sometimes to get to that point. I personally think that's the capital reserve fund is the way most financial people would like to do it, especially if you knew of something in the future that was going to happen. You put in small amounts of money as you go along. I don't know.
And Earl would say, if you've got it there, that means you're going to
You're
spend it.
going
And
to spend
he
it.
didn't like that.
Right.
But
Well,
Earl's long gone.
the other part of that is that are, in a sense, charging people, you aren't charging the people that are going to benefit from the spending of it. You're, you know, with something that you're not constantly doing, like fire trucks, if you build up a capital reserve fund, everybody that paid taxes for those years that you were building it up has paid taxes, and then whoever comes after it gets the benefit of that spending. That's the, that's the, in the theoretical sense, that's the,
Right.
and then the positive side is that it evens out your cash, your tax burden and your cash flow dramatically.
So what do you think?
I mean, I don't see why, I don't know. I guess if our concern is that we want to shore up the money, then the capital reserve fund would be the best way to go. I think that we need to be a bit more, there needs to be a bit more of a buffer than 3,000, but,
And that's fine. I threw it out there as a
Yeah.
number.
I would,
In
I
my
would
brain, I
argue for
couldn't figure out
probably,
anything that would cost more than $3,000 in a year, unless the department went kaput and, you know, didn't charge for anything and, you know, so forth and so on. And, but there, you know, there could end up being some major expenditure that was required and necessary, and it wouldn't be there,
Yeah.
you know?
I mean, I would probably argue for probably 15,000, for the wording to be to the effect of no more than 15,000 in the account at a time, and any overage should be at town meeting put into the capital reserve fund that is created on this.
Well, and
Just
that-
because
That was my next kind of question here was, the question to us is, should the selectmen set a target amount? That to me says that somehow or another, the excess was gonna have to go someplace.
and I think,
That wasn't offered here
yeah,
to us. So, Chris, do you happen to know where, other than a capital reserve fund, the excess would go?
Well, it'll be up to the town meeting. It would, well, it could be spent. That's, you know.
Yeah.
It could be spent by the selectmen at any time.
Goes to the general fund.
It could, town meeting could pull it out. If they didn't say where it went, it would go to the general fund, or they could pull it out and dictate that it went someplace else. Those are all possibilities.
So
In a
if there,
surplus situation, you know,
if there was a, and I guess I don't know how this would work, but if there was a yearly requirement that it had a target amount associated with it, and that those funds, those excess funds, and I say end of the year, I'm not real sure what that means. I don't know if that's December 31st or.
yeah, anyway.
But it goes into the capital reserve fund that's set up for
Mhm.
recreational facilities or whatever we want to call that. Can that happen? Can that work? I see if we put a number to this, that kind of indicates to me that the present warrant article, the article that produced the revolving fund would need to change. Is that how you see this happening if we were to put a limit on the funds?
If you want to limit, well, there's two kinds of limits. There's a, call it a statutory limit set by town meeting, you know, which would require changing the warrant article and saying, you know, you can have this revolving fund, but it can't have more than X in it. That's a kind of statutory limit. And then you could have what's really more a political limit, where you do like a practice where the selectmen each year would look at it and say, we either need to spend it down or recommend to town meeting that we do something with X number of dollars.
be a regulatory limit.
You know, something softer. It's not set in stone, but this is the guideline that we've used. That's nowhere near as strict, and it's not as, you know.
So the other thing that came up last week was, so let's say we said, okay, the fund needs to maintain a balance of somewhere like, say, $15,000. And then something major happens, and at the end of that year, we're at $8,000. does the town somehow replace the other to bring it up to 15,000? Or does money just not get taken out and then the following year it's allowed to build up to get up to that 15,000 again? Okay.
Yeah, you couldn't,
I would say that the
you
wording
couldn't
needs to-
mandate
to
in
be-
advance that you add money to it. That wouldn't work.
Okay.
The wording would have to be something to the effect of not to exceed X amount of dollars, but you could have whatever.
That's what we do with
So
the
that-
cable, we have a cable franchise fee
Yeah.
fund
Right.
that has a hard cap on it.
Yeah.
And everything over the cap goes to the general fund. And that's in a warrant, town meeting did that at last year's town meeting by a warrant article. They set a cap.
Right.
I'm assuming in terms of the funds that are necessary, whatever that number is, to even out the highs and the lows from year to year, that in terms of established programs that have been run, Janet, you must have a pretty good idea as to where you're going to come out on those established programs in general. Is that safe to say, or is that not safe to say?
Things change a lot even within the program, like even camp. I mean, if we get,
Okay.
you know,
Well, that answers my question. So the answer to my question is, you can't assume.
I don't have any idea where revenue goes. I can control the spending, but the revenue side of it is the part that, you know,
But even the spending you can't really control if, for instance, you offer martial arts and all of a sudden the instructor says, no, I'm not doing this anymore. The program could end. You could find
Yes.
somebody else, but if you find somebody else, it may not be at the same
Right.
rate or whatever,
yeah.
conditions. Same
Or
with
I might
camp.
be able to find another, I might not be able to find another line dance instructor or, you know.
Or camp director or whatever, and you end up with somebody that is extremely high paid compared to what you typically do, kind of a thing.
Sometime, right. One year when we had, we were paying swim teachers somewhere around $10 an hour, and I had to pay somebody $15.80 something, I think, in order to get anybody to work, because I was getting down to the wire and having to hire somebody. So, depends on the situation.
And answer
There
your-
are some things that you
Yeah,
can
yeah,
kind
the
of.
answer to my question is no.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, if
Yeah, okay,
everything
my
is pretty much.
assumptions are wrong.
Well, if everything's pretty much the same, but, you know, things, there's some, yeah.
Yeah. Just, shit happens.
I don't know that I would say that on TV, but yeah.
You got me. Um,
You have in the past said that you feel the fee-based programs generally break even
That's-
through themselves, like not maybe necessarily one-to-one, but all the incomes to all the cost will generally come close to pretty much break even. Is that?
That's the plan. I mean, when I start guesstimating on starting up a program, and I do the whole analysis of the dollar figures, I figure how many it's going to take, how many I think are going to be able to join the program, or how many are going to join the program. So I base my guesstimate on that. Say, 8 people are going to attend this program.
Mhm.
Always hoping for more. Any less than that, we probably wouldn't be able to do the program. And then kind of figure out from there how much we would be able to charge compared to other towns. And so then if we get to a dollar figure of, say, $40 for a fee, it will take, 7 or 8 people to get to the break-even point.
Mhm.
And, You know, if we have 6, we make a decision on whether or not we can run it some and hope that we'll get 2 more. Or if we get 10, then we're like, okay, well, we can either, we'll either make money, or we'll be able to run it longer, when it goes, the attendance goes down to 9, then to 8, to 7, to 6, to 5.
Right.
And at some point, we'll say, okay, we've gotten to the point where we have,
Yeah,
you know,
okay.
So what do you think we want to do here?
Well, I guess the other, before we can really talk about a dollar amount, the other thing that came up last week was whether or not the money to replace the van should be a general fund expense or a revolving fund expense. Although, from what Chris said, maybe we don't really need to think about that too much, because if the money, if we decide to put the money, to recommend that the money goes into a capital reserve, and the time comes that we need the van, then it can be a question for town meeting or a warrant article for town meeting on whether or not we want to withdraw that money and use it for the van. Right? Is that what you said?
You can do it that way.
Yep. I mean,
Unless the capital reserve fund is worded in a way that a van is not recreational property at, you know, facilities at a property, like, then it may not be able to be done that way.
Oh, I think, but we talked about the possibility of having 2 capital, one for facilities, whatever that is, and one for, and maybe one for the van.
Right, but what Chris said tonight was that you could take, if the money was being put aside each year for a fire truck, and all of a sudden there's not a fire truck, we need it's a police cruiser, we can move money from the fire truck to the police cruiser. So if we can't move fire truck to police cruiser, why wouldn't we be able
I guess that
to,
makes sense, yeah.
you know, it's still 50% of, or however much of the van would be used for rec.
Yeah.
So, I think 50% was around the number we came up with last week that we were talking about, so.
of course, the people that voted for adding money for fire trucks the year before might get a little pissed off that you now spent the money for a police cruiser.
They might.
But that's why we have warrant articles.
I can think of about 30 that might be. And their spouses.
Okay.
Okay,
Moving on.
so, are we still at 15? Are we still talking about 15?
Can I let you know, one of the discussions the selectmen had in coming up with this charge was that they don't necessarily want you to come back with a number.
Okay.
And the reason for that is not that they don't want your opinion, it's that times change. The revolving programs change, and so that may or may not dictate a change in how much you keep in the revolving fund. If we launched a high cash flow program.
Football.
Right, football is a great example where you have, just throw it a hypothetical.
That's your blood pressure.
Fine, lacrosse. I mean, something that's cash intensive, high fees, high expenses. In a revolving fund context, you want more room to swing.
Sure.
Right? So the selectmen said, we don't necessarily want a number, we want a framework to use based on the program, really, I think is.
So should the selectmen set a target amount? I think we could probably come to the decision that the answer to that question is, that part is yes. We think they should set an amount.
Well,
Yeah,
it
but-
begs the question,
Yes,
what
so
were we
how?
thinking about when we say yes?
Well, yes.
Okay?
And it's on how.
Yeah, so you kind of want to, I think we would kind of want to say, we're looking at it as this, and here's your amount of money, and here's what you think you ought to do with the rest of it, and so forth. that's the way I see that. They can do what they want to with it.
I
so
think that
that's just up to them.
from us to them, we have to have a number in there because it is part of our explanation. It's part of our thought process that for them to understand what we're talking about. I think
I think it's the
It
thought
should be in
process.
there.
The thought process is going to have to replicate itself year after year.
Right.
And that's the important,
That's
that's the
the
part,
how.
that's the
That's the
legacy.
how, yeah.
Right. And if you get that, if you use today's program and today's dollars on top of your methodology, then you come up with a number. That's a good illustration, but
Right.
it's the methodology under it that they really want.
Right.
Okay.
And it could be a no,
Right.
Yes.
and here's
Right.
why we
Yeah.
say no. So, either way, these discussions, I think, are good.
I suppose that we could say that this committee should set the target amount and not the selectmen, but that would perpetuate the committee.
I was gonna say, we're done by Thanksgiving,
Uh,
right?
that would-
Mr. Garnett.
I'm aware. I heard that this morning over breakfast. But I
So,
mean, there's a
you have
number of
something
different.
further to
there's
say?
No, there's just a number of ways of looking at the way this is
Yeah,
phrased.
yeah,
You know,
yeah.
well, depending on what they do, if they do create a capital reserve fund and they created someone to
oversee it.
oversee it, there could be you could end up on that. So don't get too excited.
I've been around. It's okay. Just don't like to be around on things that hang and hang and hang and hang forever.
Mm.
That's all.
So,
Anybody willing to make a motion on this one at this point as to what we think we might want to do?
Chris, have you heard anything in this discussion, and I've come in late on it, yeah, I guess you weren't here last week, that would describe a methodology for setting a target amount?
I think you've bounced off a few of the things. You started out with the based on the current programs, what that swing would be, and you thought it was $3,000. That swing concept is an important piece of a methodology. How do you figure out what that is? And the van, I think, the van is an oddball. It's on the one hand, it's a kind of an essential thing, but it's kind of halfway between a capital purchase and a it's
That's
an
kind
odd,
of what we
it's-
came down to
it's not big
last
enough
week
to
when we
justify
tabled.
its own fund.
Yeah.
It really isn't. We buy a $30,000 police cruiser every year in the operating budget. We don't need a reserve fund for a $15,000 van, I think is probably what the consensus would be. So it's an oddball, but you've struck on, that's a need that fits in here, and it's part of what I think the understanding in town is of the revolving fund is for things like the van as well as other things. But so you've touched on two things that hint at a methodology, but I can't take you any further than that.
Yeah, and that's my concern, that we have not dealt with the how,
Yeah,
okay? And if it's not clear to you, and from what you said, it's not clear to you, then perhaps we ought to work on tying that down a little bit. And I'm not sure how we go about that. That's a tricky one.
Well, from the three concepts that we have, we know where the revenues are gonna go. Again, this is our viewpoint of it. We know where the expenses are gonna come from. And we kinda know those other expenses, how they should get labeled as to whether they're general or rec revolving. Not specifically, but in general concepts. Those three are there. So, the fourth concept could be something that has to do with the swing costs. The problem that I see with the swing costs is you can go along for a long time and somebody like me might say, yeah, it's $3,000. But next year, the new sport comes out and you need a lot more than $3,000 to do that. And that, you now have to somehow grow the fund to get to that swing amount, allow it to grow to that amount.
Yeah, and maybe an example of that was when Zumba became very, very popular. And we put in a Zumba program, you know, kind of in the middle of the year, if you will. And that required some funds to set that up.
But I don't think more than 3,000.
That one was a subcontracted
No, just an example
program?
of something
Yeah,
comes
right.
along
Wasn't
and,
really.
you know, we're kind of starting from scratch and the revolving fund is financing it, if you will.
Right.
And you don't-
That's another good piece of methodology, you have to
and
build
you
that
don't
into.
know, and you don't know what those things are going to be or when they're going to show up, which goes back to that whole document that we got from the municipal association. And that, so, and then Janet would say, looks like we have an opportunity to do Zumba, this is what it's going to cost. I would like the selectmen to release X amount of money from the revolving fund for that. And I guess that sort of becomes part of the methodology, but that's not a methodology to determine what that target amount is going to be.
Right.
It determines how it comes out,
Which is already there.
which is already there. So I'm still wrestling with I mean, if the selectmen are going to set a target amount, and they want to know how they go about setting that, what are we going to say to that? How does that get done? What we have said so far doesn't delineate a process, and I'm,
Well, the reason that I came in last week with what I came in with was that could be the result of a methodology.
yes.
What method did you use to get there? If you don't mind.
I don't think it was a very good one, Brian, but I was trying to stimulate discussion.
Well, and the purpose
Mission
of
accomplished.
the
And-
purpose
and
of
it-
it was
yeah,
not to
and it
set a
did.
target amount, the purpose of it was to get us thinking.
Yeah,
And those are two entirely different,
right.
Right, but I
different
guess you,
things.
as much as you did pull the number from nowhere, I think a part of you didn't. I think you did look at
Well-
some things and said,
Right.
and said that this may work. Sure, we'll try this. So,
But I also thought it was very low.
yeah. I almost feel like it should. Let's keep it simple. Like, what if all of these programs didn't? All of the fee-based programs currently didn't charge a fee. What would the cost be? The cost would be X.
Mhm.
The fund should have
That
X
kind
amount of money plus,
Now that's,
plus something else for
That's
the
what I'm-
overage, the unknown, so that if for some reason these programs aren't collecting money for whatever reason, then there would be coverage for those programs. So the programs would continue. Then you need to build in, okay, we want to make sure that we have room to grow new programs. So
now you're talking.
what is an average cost of a new program? I don't think you can possibly answer that question because it ranges dramatically. You could say, we want to, what's the cost of a new youth sport on average in the state? It should add that to whatever X was. I guess for a lack of anywhere else to look, I feel like that is at least somewhere to start. You know, what's the cost of all these programs? It should have at least that to cover those programs.
You could say, in the place of that last one, you could say, plus whatever you'd be comfortable risking on a new program. Because that's what you'd be,
Yeah,
you know, if somebody wanted to,
and I guess that
Run
is
a new
wildly
Zoom
open to interpretation.
well, that's kind of a political question. It's
Yeah.
a question for the governing body as much as, you know,
Yeah.
somebody could say, I want to bring Willie Nelson out here and sell tickets and, you know, spend $100,000 and take in $120,000.
And I
that's-
vote no already.
That's
Well,
probably.
he won't be coming because marijuana's not allowed.
That's probably too big,
Does
but,
that matter with Willie?
you know,
Yeah.
so you could say, you're, when you talk about launching a new program, you're putting money at risk.
Yep.
So that could be part of your formula.
Yeah.
How much would you be, on an unknown program, how much would you be willing to risk?
Well,
So a more
new
realistic
program, not
example,
unknown.
a more realistic example is if we did a bus trip.
Right, that's
Because
a smaller.
bus trips are ones that recreation departments do. They can't sell all of the tickets on the bus. So, I mean, you would look at it, the average amount of money for a Celtics
Go to the
ticket and the
Fisher
bus, and
Cats, or-
figure that out, and that's how you could come up with a dollar amount for something that would be risking something.
But you know that anytime you start a new program. You already know what that dollar amount is.
Yes.
Would it be more streamlined to say whatever X is times 2, times 3, for a more like, just kind of.
You talking for a program or are you talking for the,
So the methodology is all the program cost is X, and then instead of saying, well, whatever, you know, plus this or plus that, it's just times 2.
well, 2014, the expenditures from the RecRevolving Fund were $63,101.28. As a for instance.
times 2. Well, and
Well, I
That's
don't,
all the money that's in there.
I don't know that you need to do times two, but no, but that's all right, that's all right.
Right.
That's the mythology.
except that
Methodology.
we are, I don't see any possibility in any given year that what that implies is a doubling of the offerings.
Correct.
I guess.
Okay.
I saw it as more of a safety net, but that's another point.
You know, and, you know, my guess is that in a typical year, that Janet might try 2 or 3 new programs. Is that a fair statement? So we don't need to double that amount of money that came out of there.
Probably not.
Well, that would be a double, that would be a doubling of the existing programs and the complete disappearance of all revenues.
Right. Which I think is
Well, and
unrealistic.
you're
but-
assuming no revenue for those new programs. That's
Or
correct.
for all programs. If you're,
If you're gonna double it, yeah, that's all programs.
yes, but for coming up with a swing, you know, if you want to protect the programs, let's say you wanted to make sure you could continue to operate all your programs for the rest of the year, and you use your annual spend, you know, for the year as your X. There's an offsetting revenue for those X's that also impacts the fund, so you don't need
the doubling.
you don't need the doubling. You may not even need X because you have to assume that you're going to get some
That's-
revenues. That's
Right.
You know.
That's correct, but until you don't know that until the revenues come in, and when you're setting it up,
But you're not
you're
gonna go
you're
blank
making
on
a
all.
commitment to, huh?
You're not gonna go blank on all.
Oh, no,
The
I know
presently
that.
run program,
I know
so-
that, no. And I don't think we would
So that
attempt
particular,
to run a program that there would be, and run it where there's no interest.
that particular year, the expenditures, according to what was provided to us, for 2014, $63,000 was expended and 78 was revenue. As a for instance.
And numbers have been thrown around about 15, 20, 30,
Yep.
3, and so on and so forth. But in that particular year, we generated 13, or was it 15?
15.
15. Which means, in essence, if we adopt those kinds of numbers, nothing changes.
Correct.
So I definitely think that 63,000 is probably a bit much to have, but
Well,
But pegging to that number is a good place to start a methodology.
Yeah.
So,
a percentage of that
A percentage
number.
or a
And that-
multiple,
and that's helpful.
whatever, but
Yeah.
that's a good anchor for a methodology.
Yeah.
So, if we took, what do current programs currently cost? Plus anticipated new programs for the next year, plus a buffer, would be a methodology that can be used. It's not doubling it, but it's just taking the, you know, each year looking at, okay, this is what it cost us this year. Okay, have the rec director, whatever, say, okay, these are some programs that, you know, we would like to do, you know, this is the hot new, you know, whatever, sport, you know, whatever, that we would like to look at for next year. And say, okay, you know, do, you know, a 10% buffer on top of that. And that would be each year going forward. So then new programs might, current programs might, the following year, include the new programs from the previous year that worked well. So now those are in there. And so it just keeps growing, and some of them are gonna drop out. So it's a constantly refreshing itself, you know, kind of methodology, allowing the governing body to leave a buffer in there,
Yeah.
you know,
Kind of.
as they kind of see fit.
Kind of describes the recreation program as it operates.
It does. Yes, and I'm like, why are we redoing this? Isn't this what and that's why I wrote it out, because I'm like, isn't this what we've already been doing? Except that the buffers continue to grow.
Yeah.
And so now we're trying to decide what's the best use for that buffer.
Yeah.
So, you know, in some years it's gonna be there, and some years it's not. So it's like,
Yeah.
you know, to keep.
I guess I want to ask you guys this question. We talk about doing, you know, a percentage of the expenditures of the rec revolving fund. So 63,000. We'll just use 2014. So we want to use a percentage of that. The question I have for you all is why, and I guess I'm looking for a specific answer that I have in my head to see if anybody's thinking the same way. Why are we taking a percentage of that money? Why are we setting it aside? For me, we're setting aside, say, 25% of total expenditures as a buffer for if programs don't do so well one year, then there's an overlay to cover any losses, hypothetical losses in those programs. So I don't know if you all feel the same way as to why are we taking a percentage of that money. And I think that goes to explaining the how for us. So when someone says, well, why are we saving 25%? Why is that part of the methodology? Well, it's because we want to maintain a buffer. We don't need a full buffer of the full cost because it's a fee-based program, so we don't expect there to be a program cost and no revenue from it. Why would we run that program? But we do expect there to be the occasional, well, we expected 10, we only got 9, so there was a little bit of a shortfall. So we
Well,
need to kind of
and I
make
think
up the
it's
difference.
not just the number of people attending a program. Other associated expenses and fees could go up.
Yeah.
Like, you know, Janet was saying that the, one of the programs that they do, each year the fee to register
Yep.
the kids keeps going up, and she kind of
But-
manages that. And
So it sounds like you're agreeing with what I'm saying as to why. To cover overage, unexpected underages of
to
revenues.
to cover unexpected, yeah,
Okay.
I would agree
Did
with
all
that.
that make sense? I kind of rambled that out and was trying to piece it together in my head. But.
Yes. It
The,
makes sense. I'm not sure that, the aspect of this whole thing that I'm wrestling with is what happens to the other money. The money that's over that.
Right. Which
And-
I think, we would have to, I think that we talked about this a little bit, is I feel like we would recommend that money go into a capital reserve fund. But we need to figure out we haven't gotten to what's the number that's an overage.
No, that's right, okay.
So,
I'm-
I guess in my head, I'm thinking, okay, if we take 25, the how is, the process should be 25% of the previous year's expenses plus a percentage for new programming. So 25% of 63,000 plus maybe 5%, 8%, whatever we
you're
decide.
talking 16,000 in round figures.
And then add another, I don't know, 4%, 5%, let's just say 5%, for potential new programming. So you end up with 15%, 30% of the overall budget of expenditures from last year. And that, to me, would be somewhere to start for a methodology of, well, how much do we put aside? Well, 25% of the overall budget is for, I guess you would say, well, we're using that for any unexpected underages and to cover the programming to an extent. And then we want to provide funding for new programming and flexibility within the rec department. So another 5% or whatever it is, 2%. If we only just want to say $2,000, what's $2,000? What percentage is that of 63,000?
Well, if you just made it 30%, then it's, in that particular case, it would be
Yeah.
$21,000.
Yeah.
Would be the total.
So, and that could be the methodology going forward every year. It's 30% of whatever we spent last year is what's in that. Any overages go to the capital reserve fund.
What's
Yeah,
that
we
make
could-
you feel like? I don't think it matters realistically. Looking at the expenditures of some of the programs, they're.
I mean, the big one would really, that
camp
buffer,
is
I think, is going to be the
5,000, but
camp.
Yeah.
I think camp
and I'm
is gonna be
assuming
the biggest
salaries on
recipient
that
of
list,
that.
Janet, is probably from camp?
Yes, but the line dancing instructors in there,
Okay, anybody
that may,
for the fee-based programs,
yes. and-
except for the contract ones?
Yeah,
Okay.
line dancing is the only one that I can think of other than some
All right, so camp,
oddball
the expenditure for
things.
camp as an entity is more like 25,000.
For the salary line, you mean?
Well, salaries and
Was
uh,
it 26? Yeah, I would say probably
No.
25.
26, 27, something like that. Okay. But besides that, most of them are, less than $3,000. Martial arts is contracted, so that's a little different, but
Janet, how would you feel if you had $16,000 available to you to start new programs next year?
That should be fine. I mean,
Does that seem like a lot? Does that seem like too little? Is that a reasonable number? And I know that
I have no
overage is not
cons-
all for new programs. It's also a buffer in the event that one of the existing programs falls short, but
it seems like it would be enough. It's, it's always hard to tell, but,
well, yeah.
I mean, if I know that that's the money that is supposed to be there, and then, if I had planned 3 programs and we spent it on 2 programs, starting it up, then I just wouldn't do the 3rd one until the next year or something, you know?
Or stagger it such that you've already made the money back, perhaps from,
Yeah, I mean, there's,
yeah, however it plays out.
not sure what you mean by stagger it, but,
You'd have revenue from the first program to inform your decision on the third program.
Right,
We wouldn't start them all at once.
not just throw them all out at the same time and go, there it is. No.
Yeah, and presumably, if you wanted to launch something that put 20 grand at risk, there's gonna be some broader discussion about that, It's, you know,
that would be a conversation with the newsletter.
right,
Yeah,
Right.
which goes back to how much are you willing to risk?
all right. So, Bill, your number was basically the 25%, right? 16,000
No, I just gave 16,000, he was talking 25%, and then
of
I
last year. Yeah.
extrapolated, you know, I did the math in my
Right.
head and said that's about 16,000, and then
But as
my
far,
concern was, is that going to, how does that
Yeah.
seem to Janet in
yeah,
terms
no,
of what,
understand. And-
Yeah.
But that was based on,
based on that methodology?
so the methodology, if we were to provide a methodology that identified 25% of last year's expenditures, that would be the 16,000.
And that would be the 16,000 that would be in some way carried forth into next year, is what I'm assuming
Yes.
here. Okay.
Yeah.
So can I need to like wrap my head around this, and I think we're going the same place. So
Want
if
a
we're
towel?
saying, so if we're saying there's 140,000 in the fund right now, and we go, and a warrant article is written that the methodology is that 16,000 is going to be what the fund starts with each year. So we would be making the recommendation, whoever we is, to withdraw from the revolving everything except 16,000, put it in a capital reserve for future rec use, and then start the program on 16,000. The money flows in and out. At the end of the year, say we have 20,000, then the following year, 4,000 would be moved to the capital reserve so that we're starting back at 16.
Yes.
That
except
isn't
for-
totally what he said,
I-
but 16,000 was being used as the figure.
Oh,
that
yeah, I was just
Okay.
using that
So it would
as
be
the
25% of
example.
last
Yeah.
year's
I
expenditure.
would hesitate to use solid numbers. I would.
Okay, so
would
then
feel more-
25%,
Yeah.
the next year might be 18,000.
Yeah.
And so, you know,
It allows it to ebb and
Okay.
flow with the.
I was just
program.
making sure that I had this process of how this would work kind of like figured out in my,
So, wording it would be, you know, we would recommend that no more than 25% of the previous year's expenditures not be held in the rec revolving fund. All monies over 25% shall be moved to the capital reserve fund
for future
for.
rec, future rec use.
I think that would be.
So timing-wise, does that work? If we got dollar amounts at December 31st or whenever Betsy can get that, and if we're going to transfer money from the rec revolving to a capital reserve, would that need to go on a warrant article?
No.
No, you're describing something that is gonna be pretty challenging to write and explain and implement.
You're going to set up you're going to set up a capital reserve fund with no money in it.
First off,
That's your first
First
step,
off.
yes.
Okay, with no money in it, and the understanding is, because that's all it's going to be, it seems to me, is it, let's go back, let's take it back a little bit. The recommendation of this committee might be that the recreation director go to the selectmen and direct that X amount be put into said capital, X amount of the rec revolving fund be put into this particular capital reserve fund for facilities.
Well, that's why I'm asking about timing of it.
It's going to be tricky.
Because you,
So is there a better way to do this with kind of the process that we just went through? How would that work? How would it be?
Well, it's
different?
tough to have both a hard cap and a number that flexes with time, a percentage. Those obviously don't go together very well.
Well, I don't
I
think we would
wonder-
have a hard cap.
Well, that's what
The
the
percentage would
Conservation
be the
Commission
cap.
basically has now, right? They take certain percentage.
It's a percentage of a certain revenue stream, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. We could, the timing is tricky and when do you do it and
And is that a fiscal thing?
yeah, that fiscal calendar thing could be tricky.
I'm just asking if the logistics are gonna work.
I don't know, I'd
If we
have
get
to
the
think it
dollar
through.
amount by, at the end of December 31st, which we may not get until the second week of January, does it have to go on a warrant article to take it
Yeah, all
from
of
the
that.
revolving fund to put it into it, which means that you have to have that warrant article written by the end of January.
Yeah, there's a whole lot of things that, because you have to use audited numbers and you don't get your audit,
The audited
It's-
numbers won't come until after,
yeah. So
right?
I think rather than, let me back you up a step. To get to,
You can get back to us on this if you want. I mean,
no, I'm going to try and talk you out of being so complex about it. Historically, the amount of expenses and the amount of revenues are actually pretty constant in the rec fund. The range between 2008 and 2014 of total expenses was a high of 78 in 2010, which was when we bought a van,
Yes.
right? Okay, so we bought a van one year and we had 78 in expenses, and in 2008, 6 years ago, we had 60,000. So the range of numbers that you're pegging your percentage to has historically been pretty constant. We know, I have right in front of me, 60 to 78.
Yep.
That's the swing. So what you're talking about in the end, of this theoretical move from reserve to, from revolving to reserve, is actually not that big a number each year, which is great. That's a good thing, but it's a lot of movement and a lot of activity and votes and all kinds of crazy stuff for a relatively small amount.
So you could just take
If-
the percentage off the midpoint, which is, 69 or 70,000?
Well, you could write as complex an algorithm as you wanted to, but for just the political realities of getting through town meeting and going through that whole process, it may not be worth it to try and do something every year because those swings are so small. When this really matters in real dollar terms is the first year.
Right.
Yes,
You're presumably going to give this methodology to the selectmen, and the selectmen will say, yeah, that's a good methodology, or some variant of it. Let's use this to do something at town meeting 2016. And it's gonna be done if you're thinking we pull a bunch of money out of revolving and put it in a reserve fund, that's where you envision this going. It's gonna be in one fell swoop, it's gonna have a methodology, and the vast majority of the money is gonna be in a capital reserve fund. And then it's just gonna do this.
Right.
At 25% of a $12,000 move every year, it's not worth going through all that unless we have another big event or unless the fund grows again over 15 years to the point where it's a big number again. So it may not be worth doing all of those gymnastics to move a little bit of money each year. Because it's gonna be very challenging from an accounting and,
I guess what it, so,
and I understand all that, but now I don't understand the question. Unless it's the
Or the reason for the question.
or the reason for the question, unless it is truly to figure out that first year thing.
No, I may have, yes, I guess that is just what I said, and that may not be what the selectmen had intended. They,
Well, no, but maybe it is, because that was the problem I had with what I was doing, was because, again, once you get the fund down to some number, then it's the catch-22 of, are you gonna have enough money in there over the times, and are you gonna have enough money in there to run the programs that are necessary? Or is there a vehicle that's available in case you run out, that you have the capability of putting funds to it? Like, Dee was kinda asking about, do funds go into it automatically as they come out of it automatically? And in the answer, I kind of figured was no to
I
that.
figured
So-
it was doing, I was
But
still
what
gonna
the hell?
ask.
So somehow or another, that target amount is gonna end up causing some sort of consternation of transferring funds. And I'm not sure that I know how the fund has grown over the years to where it is, but if it's like every 5 years that we use some methodology in order to take funds out, is that kind of what you're saying?
yes, I think it's probably better to have that kind of horizon on it.
10 years
Yeah.
or something to that effect,
This new
another one
process every 5
time.
years or whatever. as
Something
needed.
to the effect of, it's a one-off, we'd recommend that they put everything from the revolving fund except for $16,000 into a capital reserve fund every 5 years. That number should be the revolving fund should be re-looked at, so that anything over 25% of, or whatever number we choose, 16,000 again, every 5 years, anything over 16,000 should be moved. So instead of every year, it's every 5 years.
Yeah, I think that would work really well as a piece of guidance for posterity, and say when people start looking at this again in 5 years, they can go look back and say, oh, this is why they did what they did.
Yeah.
I don't think you'd want to try and bind a town meeting 5 years from now from doing something, or try and codify that in 5 years you're going to do this formula again.
Right.
But part of the legacy of all this work could be, hey, this is what we've always done. We've always tried to get it to about this.
Yeah.
And then if in 5 years, we find ourselves with $75,000 in that revolving fund, and people start asking the question again,
Like, oh, well, it's
it
time
gets
to
really easy
reevaluate
for the
already.
selectmen to say, hey, let's put this on the warrant and get it back to that, whatever that methodology was, and
Yeah.
reevaluate the methodology, did it work? And then,
I feel like that might be the most streamlined way to go. And I do like the idea of when it builds back up, there's a mechanism already in there to say, okay, well, we're gonna go back, we're gonna take 25%, keep that, put the rest of it in the capital reserve.
All right. So let me see if I got this right, and then maybe we can vote on this being another concept. Number 2, should the selectmen set a target amount needed in the RF? We believe that should be 25% of last year's expenditures, or
Previous year's expenditures.
previous year's expenditures.
I would agree with
Or we
that.
can say 16, I mean,
I like,
either way, but
I don't know, I feel like the percentage,
I like the percentage, I guess. The thing I liked about the percentage is it can be applied every year, or in that mechanism.
yeah,
But the reality here is that there's a dollar amount that I think we here feel is probably a good dollar amount at this point in time. and we can say how we came up with that dollar amount.
Mhm.
And maybe that goes to the methodology.
It will become a mythology, but it's just a methodology for now.
What's the median? 60 to 78? You're looking at 69.
Yeah.
But you don't know the median, you might know the mean, but
You know what I meant.
That's the average.
So you're looking at 25% of this 17,000 and change, so. I just wanted to know what that number was.
Yeah, and
So in actuality, that 25% figure, if you're looking at 5 years, would be 25% of the average expenditure over the previous 5 years, not of any particular year, correct?
well, yeah,
Well,
we can
yeah.
do that. All right, so 25% of previous 5-year expenditures. Now, these
Of the average, not the
Not the
25% of the total, of the average.
what's the 2004 number that you're working with? Expenses?
2014?
60,
Yeah,
63,101.28.
okay.
Looks like you're bursting to say something.
I was just laughing to myself because, you know, we all used to carry around our own little personal calculators, and now we just carry around a phone. So just, you were doing yours and he's doing his,
Oh,
and
yeah.
it just, you know,
Five,
it just.
5-year average is 69,105,
69,105.
which turns into 13,8 at 25%. Is it 25% of your average, right? Is that what you?
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, I just divided by 5. I want to divide by 4, I'm sorry.
I thought that was off.
I was like,
I wonder what kind of phone
No,
he
I'm not
got.
really good at math.
And I don't
Did I really
carry a
mess it up?
phone.
That's good.
I hit the wrong clear button, so I'm not doing it over again, but that's,
All right, 25% of the average of the previous 5 years' expenditures for RecRevolving fund. That's what I was reading off here, I think. So that's.
a good number.
Yeah.
That'll be consistent over time.
well,
Yeah.
and
The
it-
accounting of it will be
And it's
consistent.
RecRevolving fund, all that stuff kind of goes together nicely.
All right, so we've got our target amount and we've got our how.
Mhm.
And then all excess. Where'd I write that down? All excess funds would be,
We recommend.
no, that's in all of that.
Okay.
It's implied.
We're not, we're coming up with our concepts here.
Gotcha. All right.
And then in the front of each concept, we recommend the following. All excess funds to be placed in capital reserve fund for recreational.
I think that we need to have a concept.
Facilities.
We recommend capital reserve fund be created and be kind of specific about that. That way, when we keep referencing this capital reserve fund, they'll have something to draw up
Yep.
to draw from.
Want to do that for next week?
You can talk about that next week.
Chris, you
Can
might
you-
want to do some checking on how that might work.
An automatic mechanism.
Well, one of the things that I'm a little concerned about is, do capital reserve funds go on for a certain length of time or not?
They go on until the town meeting decides to do something else with it.
Can that be 20 years?
We have a fire station capital reserve fund with about $15 in it.
And when was it started?
Oh, that wasn't,
When they started saving money for the new fire station, and they spent all but $15 of it, and town meeting's never gone back and said, we need to abolish this fund. So
okay.
they go on forever.
they go
Until
on
town-
forever unless
Unless acted upon by the town meeting, yep.
abolished.
Can you read that
So
out
we
one
just
more
need
time?
to start, do the Pawtuckaway Station, the money's already started.
I'm not sure what the front of it should say, but
Oh, the state, oh, the fire station.
the target
Yes,
amount
For the Pawtuckaway side.
equals
Okay.
Yeah, we got enough for a mailbox.
25% of the average of the previous 5 years' expenditure of the rec revolving fund. All excess funds to be placed in capital reserve fund for recreational facilities. That last two words we can change, but.
Chris, go back to the question that I asked you. What's your understanding of the methodology?
It's much clearer than it was an hour ago. Yes, what you just put together is something that the selectmen will be able to use.
That was Brian.
It
Thank you,
will make sense. It will be relatively easy to explain at town meeting in terms of how you got to this number. And it's not subject to a lot of interpretation. It's pretty clear. It's
Yeah.
what
Not a big fan of interpretation.
Before you would ask for a vote, could
But-
we sort of,
I was just trying to nail something down.
okay, because I was going to ask for maybe like a week to sort of digest this a little bit.
Well,
'Cause
no,
things
the-
always pop up in my mind,
Yeah.
on the way home.
And that's why I do these as concepts.
Yeah,
Just, and I guess what I would like to say is that our minutes ought to have the three charges at the beginning. And then, I just kind of came up on this, and then any of the concepts that we create kind of be there after that.
Can you do us a favor? Will you add the fourth one to your list? Will you type it and print a copy for us for
Yeah.
next week?
Yeah, I can,
We'll all have our concepts.
yeah,
Thank you.
and that's what I was getting to, is this way it would be in the minutes, every time.
Perfect.
I can add that to my
I don't
template,
wanna make,
yes.
I don't wanna make more work for you,
Oh, I can,
but,
that's.
does that sound good? I
Yeah,
mean,
Yeah.
we
to
might
me, it
have,
refreshes
we
my,
might have to go back and forth a little
Sure.
bit, on nailing down exactly the concepts and that kind of a thing.
Yep.
You know, to put in there, but yeah, it's easy enough to put that in the template.
I can type these up and send them out.
Yep.
Thank you.
Well, I've been taking notes for today and last week too, so.
All right, what do you think? We do that for tonight?
I think that's great. I think that
What do
really
you
kind
wanna
of
do
nails
for
down
next
number
week?
2.
We just, capital reserve fund language? And what charge have we not talked about yet?
Number 3 is, are there other policies or internal controls not currently in place that are recommended relative to the RRF?
We talked about this a little bit in our first few meetings, but I feel like now that we've had much deeper conversations, it wouldn't hurt us to go back to that briefly.
We haven't really produced anything for this, although our 3 concepts are kind of in there. If you take the 3 concepts that we first have and put it against number 1, I think we've pretty much covered everything that would be there, at least from a general sense of things. And then this is more of the catch-all, what other things exist. And I think this is where we've talked about things like the van.
Nottingham
It's, but I don't know what else is there. But the van is one of those things that is easy to take from the rec revolving fund, but in the scheme of things, it probably doesn't reflect how the van is actually used. How the town personnel that are directly related to the rec department are paid when they are active participants in the fee-based program.
I'm sorry, say that again?
How the town, the full-time town personnel are being paid while they are actively participating in a fee-based program. One could say, based on our concepts, that their salaries be paid from the rec revolving fund while they are actively participating, camp director,
Camp director.
in that position.
Which is what happened this year.
But on the surface, I don't agree with that at all.
I-
And we can get into that next week.
No, and that's fine, but that's, I think, what is here.
Yeah.
What I'm saying, that's an example of, I think, what this is. I'm with you, by the way,
All right.
okay? I personally believe that the town employees should be doing the town things, and they should be hiring people to run these
I think we can,
specific events, but that's, I think,
Yeah.
what is included in this.
I think that
Okay.
should definitely be part
Because,
of our conversation.
because that would not fall out of here. If it says expenses directly related to fee-based programs will come from the RRF, that means employees that are actively involved in that will be paid from the RRF.
Correct.
That's what that says.
That's what it
Right.
says.
So there's exceptions to the rule,
Yes.
I believe, and I think that's what that is. So let's think on that for next week also.
Perfect.
Okay.
I'll move to adjourn.
Second.
Well, all in favor?
Yes.